Okay. And out the as well, everybody. So with us tonight, she did say along, which I'm going to read for her. And it says, communities and allies are observing Holocaust Day, Yom HaShoah. This year, we are incredibly lucky that one of our very own members will be sharing her own personal experiences of survival through horrendous times. This will be done in an interview format with Diane Zilka asking questions of her mother, Ellen Zilka. Ellen and Diane are living proof of the generational thriving of the Jewish people, rising up from times of terrible devastation. With gratitude to Ellen and Diane, who, by the way, are both members of our congregation, we join a global day of remembrance, pledging never again for the Jewish people or for anyone else. So at this point, I am going to spotlight Diane and Ellen. Okay, so you should see both of them. If you want to, we're going to have time for questions and answers at the end. So I assume that Diane and Ellen, you want to hold the questions till the end?
Yes.
Okay, that would be great.
You could, Bobby, can you unmute Ellen?
No, I can only send a link. Is she on the computer?
We're good. We're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you have a question and you don't want to forget it, you can type it into the chat room if you know how to do that. Otherwise, jot down your question or just hold your question and we'll have time for them at the end. And with that, I will let Diane and Ellen take it away.
Thanks so much, Bobby. Good evening, everyone. I think, as is our tradition in our congregation, we'll start with a moment of visual access for those who are visually challenged. And so I am a white woman, 62, with, I guess, grayish hair, eyeglasses, black shirt, and a mother of pearl necklace that my mom gave me. And just to move this forward a bit, my mom, Ellen Zilka, is here. She's got beautiful blue eyes. She's wearing eyeglasses. She's lovely hair, and she's wearing a pink cowl-necked sweater. So just also for context, we thought we'd like to just give you a very brief description of the kindertransport, of what the kindertransport was, because you're going to hear more about it this evening. The kindertransport, or children's transport, was a unique humanitarian rescue program which ran between November 1938 and September 1939. Approximately 10,000 children, the majority of whom were Jewish, were sent from their homes and families in Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, to Great Britain. In response to the Kristallnacht, which we'll also discuss, the British Home Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, agreed to speed up immigration by giving travel documents to some people. The essential bottom line is that every child was given, children were given a chance to escape, even if their parents couldn't. And so I'll just say one more thing. The first kindertransport departed from Berlin in December 1, 1938. In March 1939, after Germany entered Czechoslovakia, transports from Prague were hastily organized. And the last group of children from Germany departed on September 1, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland and provoked the World War II. The last known, for our friend Roby, who's Dutch, the last known kindertransport from the Netherlands left on May 14, 1940, the day the Dutch army surrendered to Germany. Many of the children stayed in England or immigrated to Israel, America, Canada, Australia. And here we have Ellen to tell her story about her experience as well. So without further ado, I will just start this conversation with you, Ellen. Hi, Mom.
Okay. Hi, darling. Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Um, where were you born and in what year?
I was born in a suburb of Berlin called Steglitz in the year 1928.
Do you have memories of what life was like there when you were a little girl?
Oh, yes. It was very, very comfortable. As I say, we lived in a suburb. My father was a traveling salesman, so I only saw him weekends. And my mother, as was a custom at the time, was a stay-at-home mother to myself and a brother who was 5 years younger than I was.
Did you go to school?
Yes, I went to school, probably started with kindergarten, and I'm not sure quite what age I was, but there was a beautiful custom in Germany, and that's still being done, I think, where a child for the first day of kindergarten is given a cornucopia filled with sweets and school supplies like pencils and rulers and so on. And it's still being done in Germany and Austria, yes.
And you remember receiving that?
Oh, sure. I have a picture of it, yes.
Did you have friends and playmates?
I had one very good friend that I remember, yes. And she stayed with me all the time before I had to leave Berlin, yes. Not a Jewish friend.
So speaking of Jewish, you had a Jewish upbringing, is that right? Can you describe it?
Yes. I went to Hebrew school also and learned to read and write, mostly just to read the print. Of course, never understood what I was reading. To this day, one doesn't. And what was the question?
Well, and you had a Jewish upbringing.
Yes, my father was very observant. Yeah, my father was very, very observant. So
you went to synagogue?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Are there any other memories or happy memories that you have from living, let's say, before the Nazis came into power, before it got bad? Anything else you want to share, like family visits or anything like that?
Oh, yes. My mother took my brother and myself quite often to visit her parents, my grandparents in Cologne. They owned a shoe store and lived above the store. And my mother had her younger sister living there and a cousin who had a boy the same age as my brother. So we used to visit them for the holidays. And my grandmother had a tailor, a dressmaker who made dresses for me and my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
That was the child of my mother's middle sister.
Well, we'll put a name. Is that Vera?
Yeah, Vera, Vera was the child. My aunt was Rosie. Her husband was Walter. And they lived in Erfurt, which I think is in the middle of the country. It was in the eastern zone with Russian occupation after World War II. And my uncle there was the superintendent of Jewish cemetery. He was trained in horticulture. That was his background. Yeah.
And those were times when you got to visit family and be with them. And would you say you had a good life in
Yes,
Germany?
very good, very good.
I think you described to me your life, you would say, was a middle-class life. Is that fair?
Yes, yes. As I said, my mother stayed home. That was the way it was done. Yes, my father came home weekends. And we had a car. I don't ever remember taking rides in the car, but there is a photograph of me in this 1920s something automobile, and I'm a toddler.
Okay.
But we didn't use the car much, no.
Well, a little forward in time, as we all know, the Nazis came into power. I guess it's fair to say 1933 officially. Ellen, did your life begin to change at that point?
Not very much at the beginning. I mean, I know they had elections and you would see brown shirts marching in the streets. And at election time, there was a lot of beer drinking in the pubs. But at first there was no change, no.
No.
But,
Um,
and then the Nuremberg laws came into existence and things got tougher, yes.
all right. So a couple things that I think I know that you shared before is that your schooling situation changed, right?
Yes, well, we were forced in 1938, I think it was, to move into central Berlin itself. And I assume it was what they wanted it to be, the beginning of a ghetto. I have no proof because I wasn't there at that time. But we were forced to leave our apartment in the suburb and move into the central city. And we had to share an apartment with another Jewish couple. And I remember my mother complaining that it was very difficult for her to have to share a kitchen with another woman.
Yeah. Do you know how many people were in that family?
No, I don't.
But
remember.
you were
Maybe
four.
We stuck to ourselves, but also at that time, so this is late 38, my father was no longer traveling. He was home all the time. And they were thinking of emigrating, but I think they started too late. But I remember my father trying to learn Spanish in case we went to South America, where he had a brother. And I'm sure they contacted him, but we never heard from him or never got a visa. And
Okay.
my mother tried to learn some skills so that they could make a living if they were emigrating. And she learned candy making and sewing,
Mhm.
dressmaking. But I have a dress she made, but that was the extent of it. I don't think she loved doing it, no.
At this point, you were being treated as Jews, not as citizens. So for example, Bobby, maybe we could do this. Would you mind screen sharing the first document that I gave you? Just a moment, folks. If you're screen sharing, I can't see it, but it's hard for me to.
Let me try it again.
Okay. Now, it may be hard for me because you've spotlighted us, so it may be that I can't. Oh, there we are. Perfect. It's coming up. No, that's the last one.
Yeah, I know. I got it.
Okay, great. Mom, I don't know that you would recognize this thing, but this.
Sure I do.
Okay, can you, Bobby? It's 2 pages, if you don't mind.
What'd you say?
There we are. So what is this document, Mom?
It's a Jewish identification card that everybody had to get. And you notice my left ear shows. Apparently the Germans thought that everybody's ear is unique, like a thumbprint, we think here. And it gives all my names. Well, my name was Ellen Ruth at the time, and Thea. And then every Jewish female had to take the name Sarah, and the males had to take the name Israel. So it's Ellen Ruth, Thea, Sarah, Fass.
Wow.
And it gives, on the other hand, I can't see it well, but I guess my age and address. Yeah.
So this is something that you have to carry around with you, right?
Yes, yeah. And you see the stamp, the Nazi stamp on there, and my fingerprint,
Yeah.
plus the ear. Yes.
Plus your ear, exactly. Thanks, Bobby. We could take that down. So during this time, 1938, well, we know that Kristallnacht happened, and I mentioned that, I think it was November 1938. But at this point, your house, your apartment that you had to share was near the Central Synagogue in Berlin. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what do you, if anything, what do you remember at all from that?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful synagogue with a gold dome. It was not burned or torched during Kristallnacht because the local police chief was sympathetic to the Jews, so he didn't let his thugs burn it. It was burned, or rather bombed and burned, by the Russians when, during the end of the war, they tried to occupy Berlin. And it's just a shell now, but it's a community center with the Jews living in Berlin. And there are quite a large number of Jews nowadays living in Berlin. Because it's a center of culture.
Thank you. Was your father taken away or impacted around this time? Can you tell?
He was taken away to Dachau, as many, many men were on that day. And again, he had a sympathetic Nazi. When my father asked the next day if you could come back to the apartment to get his towels and to fill in, the man let him do it. He escorted him, and then he was taken back to Dachau. And I don't know how long he was there, but he did come back before I left.
Okay. And at this point, your aunts and uncles, who you've mentioned, and your cousin Vera, they all had started to leave Germany. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's true. My uncle had a sister already, she and her family, living in Milwaukee, and they were able to get them visas. And my aunt and uncle, my mother's middle sister, arrived January 1, 1939. But they lived through Kristallnacht. And my uncle was chased around the cemetery. Yeah.
Aunt Lotta, I mean, I don't think you gave her name before, but Lotta Friedman, where was she living?
She and her family, she had a husband and one son the same age as my brother. They were able to get out. They were living in London when the war broke out.
Okay, so we're talking now around 1938, basically into 1939. Your parents have not succeeded in being able to arrange for the family to depart. Well, basically, at this point, we know that you got on the kindertransport. Ellen, can you tell everyone about how that came about?
Yeah, my aunt Lotte, I call her aunt, she was really my second cousin, my mother's cousin. As we just said, they were already living in London. And I think my mother must have heard about the kindertransport and asked her cousin Lotte to put my brother and my names down so that we could leave.
And so it happened. Arrangements were made.
And now when I became a parent, I realized the great sacrifice my parents made by letting their children go.
Indeed. We'll talk now, but maybe if you don't mind, actually, Bobby, the second document, just to give context for what was happening in 1939, 38, 39. It's labeled number 2, I think. Okay, so I don't know if you've seen this for a while, and we were joking earlier. I feel like I'm Mr. Gates on Finding Your Roots on PBS because I'm showing my mom documents about her past. This, Ellen, was the birth certificate, your birth certificate, but it's dated actually at the bottom, I think, 1938. There, a little further down, Bobby. And what it shows to me is that this was being prepared for either the family's departure or your departure. I imagine this is something your parents obtained as necessary paperwork to begin your.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So,
They did as much as they could. Didn't help them, but yeah.
okay, so they did arrange for you to depart, and your departure, thank you, Bobby, we're finished with that document, was on July 22, 1939. If you don't mind, Bobby, to go back once more, and we'll go to the next document, which would be, I think, document number 3.
Well, Diane, can I correct you?
Of course, please.
It was July 25, 1939, and it was the 9th of Av. So that day always has a double significance for me.
Wow.
The 9th of Av, yes.
So, Ellen, I don't know if you could see this document here, but this is what I understood to be the paper, the card that, and I think it has your picture on the next page. It also says Sarah, as everyone can see. It's dated July 22, 1939, but it's probably in preparation for you to wear this strung around your neck on the train as you departed. And this document, where we are at this page 2, has the departure date, and it may be the 25th, it may be the 22nd, or maybe you arrived on the 25th of July. But it shows both German and with a Nazi stamp on it. And then at the top, you'll see there's English. The English part is your embarkment, your arrival in England. So how did you, okay, well, I mean, let's take a moment with that document, but just for everyone's sake. And we could finish with that document, Bobby. Thank you. And I just want to now get into the detail, Ellen, of your actual departure. Can you remember the day? And can you
Yes.
Can you describe it, please?
But I would just like to say that my mother must have been super busy preparing for my brother's departure, which was 2 weeks before mine, and then mine. And we each were allowed to take one suitcase with us. And for me, she packed, just besides my clothing and stuff like that, also other things, I don't know why, but a blanket and a tablecloth and some towels, and every item, and she must have done it for my brother too, she had sewn name tapes in, so that if the Germans were going to look at our suitcases as we're leaving, they wouldn't think we're taking them in order to sell them.
Got it.
Yeah. So she must have been very, very busy in those weeks. So the talk about the day of departure. Well,
just a moment. I'm going to, before we get to the moment, because I'm going to share with folks this this bracelet right here. I've been wearing, my sister and I agreed to share it. It's a very precious thing. It is a bracelet that my mom's parents put into her luggage when she left Germany, among other things. And Mom had carried this from Germany to England to America and every place she ever lived. And it was always there in the jewelry box. And we've agreed to take good care, be good stewards of this bracelet. But that's something that was in the luggage as well. So, Mom, let's get to the actual day, if you'd like, if you could. Just tell us what you remember.
Well, I remember, for me, in a way, it was good fortune that my brother left 2 weeks before, because for the first time in 5 years, I had my parents to myself. But on the actual day, you know, it's been reinforced my memory with films and so on, and other people's recollections. But I remember being at the station. I don't know how we got there. And of course, all the children crying and hugs and more crying. And all of us were told the same thing, more or less 3 things. Behave yourself, do as you're told, don't be demanding, and it won't be long and we'll see you again and we'll write to you. But we were all told to be, quote, good children. And my parents had, there was no such thing as hand luggage, but I guess I had a bag or something. She packed for me naturally food and a little pillow for comfort at the neck that you blew up. I know I had a camera in my suitcase and a pen and pencil, a very good make, Mont Blanc. And in London, in the station where many of the trains arrived, the Kindertransport Association has put up a statue of children. They first put up one of a boy and a girl in the suitcase, and they've put up a different one since. And we visited it. And of course, the commuters just walk by and don't look at it. But there was a Gentile grandmother with her child, and that lady looked at the suitcase's loose height, so you could see what's in it, what kind of things kids had.
Yeah.
And this lady said to her granddaughter, gee, I read that book.
Oh,
And
well, that's good that you could, see the arc of all of this from then to now. But let's focus on that day or that journey.
Well, we were all told, as I say, it won't be long. And as I said, be good. And while it was sad and lots of tears and lots of hugs, being young kids, we kind of looked at it as an adventure, almost as if we were going to a summer camp.
Wow. Do you remember?
Because they kept emphasizing, we'll see you again. We'll see you again.
Do you remember your parents being there and saying goodbye? Was there?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
And the advantage of me leaving from Berlin rather than some of the other towns, they were able to jump onto the underground and go to the next train station. So I saw them once more, and that was very special.
You saw them from your train. You saw your parents on the next platform.
Yeah. Now, how they knew which carriage, I have no idea.
Do you remember the journey? Actually, did you take a boat? You must have at some point.
Well, yes, we once we got to Holland, I guess the train stopped. We were out of Germany, and Dutch volunteers came onto the train and gave us hot chocolate. I remember that very well. Yes, hot chocolate. And then we went on. I think it's called the Hook of Holland, and we boarded ships to cross the English Channel, and that's a very rough ride. But we managed. I think many people were, seasick.
I can imagine. When you arrived, do you remember being met by anybody, and where did you go from there?
I was put onto. Well, we arrived in England. What do you call it? It's the east coast of England.
Oh,
yes, the east coast.
I think it was Plymouth, maybe.
No, Plymouth is in the south.
All right, don't listen to me.
My friend lives there now. Yeah, we were put onto trains, I guess, depending on where our final destination would be. And I went to London, I think unaccompanied. And that was the requirement of Kindertransport, that the children come unaccompanied.
Right, of course. So did anyone meet you at some point, and where did you?
Yes. Somebody met me, and we all wore labels. So I assume my name was on the label. I don't have that anymore. A name and number. Anyhow, I was met and put onto a train to where I was going to live.
Okay,
and the west of England.
Okay, so where did you live, Ellen? And let's talk about your life in England at that point. Where did you live?
Well, I think I'll tell you something interesting. When I arrived where I lived, and I was taken in by a lady who was a retired hospital superintendent. She ran something, I called it old ladies. It was nowadays we call it a rehab place, a convalescent home. And there were about 10 or 12 middle-aged, oldish ladies living there. And this lady took me in.
Mom,
It was in the west of England. Some of you may have visited it, in the Cotswolds, a beautiful part of England.
and the village was called Stow-on-the-Wold, right?
No, it was called The Edge, near Stroud.
Nice.
Stroud was the nearest big town. It was really, really rural. We had no running water and we had no indoor plumbing. And the war stopped this, electrification. It was quite primitive, and the phone was only used for great emergencies.
Did you have other children in the house with you?
Yes. The lady, her name was Miss Richmond, and in honor of her, I named my first child after her. My son's middle name is Richard. I thought that's the least I can do. What was the question?
So were there other
Oh
children?
yeah, somebody else. She was so considerate that I should have companionship because of these oldish ladies. I was 10 years old, that she had a friend living elsewhere who had taken in a Jewish couple from Germany. The woman was the cook, the husband was the gardener, and they had a daughter more or less my age. So during the school year, that girl lived with me.
What's her name?
This
I
way.
forgot. What was her name?
And she went to high school with me. Yeah, she went to school with me.
What
And
was
then-
what was this young lady's name? I forget.
Maria.
Maria.
Yeah,
And
her parents baptized her, thinking it would help, but they left Germany anyhow.
okay, let's talk a little bit about your education and your experience. Did you go to school while you were there?
Yes.
Did you learn?
And
You learned
so
English?
I arrived at the end of July. School started in September, and somehow children learn a new language very quickly. I did learn English quite quickly, but I remember they were studying mythology. And between trying to learn English and the Greek gods and the Roman gods having different names, I never mastered mythology. And another thing, I think this is interesting. In England, every morning, there's a religious service. And we refugee children, and there were 4 or 5 besides me, we were excused from attending the religious service. And religion was one of the subjects in the school curriculum, and we were excused from that also.
Ellen, did you receive religious education or instruction anyway, or yourself?
Yes, yes.
How did that go?
Miss Richmond took care that I should get religious instruction, and I received it through a correspondence course from the synagogue in London. It was mainly Bible stories. But for the high holidays, the refugee committee made arrangements for us refugees to attend services. I remember it was a beautiful mansion type of house. And on Yom Kippur afterwards, we broke the fast there.
Very
And-
nice. Ellen, so I have a question about your brother, because we did talk about Gerald and that Gerald left 2 weeks before you. Just so I could just move this along a little bit. We have about 10 more minutes to talk or so. Gerald went to Manchester, England, and was taken in by a Jewish couple there, right?
Correct. If I may correct you, it was
Always.
Derby. I'm sorry, it was
It's
Derby,
okay.
but it's the same thing. Derby had a small Jewish population. It was very close-knit. And the couple took him in, yes. They were childless, so they got a very lovely little boy.
Okay.
5 years.
And did you see Gerald during
Yes.
the war years?
I was able to travel because Pesach and Easter come more or less the same time. I always had school vacation. He had school vacation. So every year for Passover, I visited him for the
Okay.
2 weeks. Yeah.
And so during the war years that you were in England, did you you made friends, right? And
Right.
could you say you had a good experience? Is that a fair
Yes.
thing?
Yes.
Um,
I became very friend. Next door where I lived were three cottages attached. And in the third, Miss Richmond had two cottages. They were adjoined. And the third one was an English family that had evacuated from London. So I became very friendly, and we always went to school, traveled to school together. And somehow one other girl became a close friend who I used to stay with during weekends. Yes.
Bobby, if you don't mind, it's the document number 5. If I got this right. Let's just take a look at that. So I think it's a couple pages long, or few, not much there, but basically what that was, I believe, Mom, is this is your, let's go to the one with the picture, if you don't mind. And so I think Ellen, well, we're having a little trouble on the picture part, but
yeah.
I don't know what this.
yeah, I know. There's something with your picture on it. I do think it was, this is an embarkment.
Oh, yeah.
Such, but
In my school uniform, yeah.
yeah. What that was, you became a registered alien. I think you had to have some sort of card while you were in England, right? An identity card.
My cousin who
Bobby,
came.
Sorry, Mommy, if you don't mind, Bobby, maybe just play around and see if you could just get to the page.
Yeah, I tried. It's not.
It's too big. Okay, not a big problem. Yeah.
Let me try one other thing.
Or just,
My cousin was 18 years old, a male, and there it is, my school uniform. Yeah. He was sent as an enemy alien. He was sent to Canada.
And his daughter is on today, just quietly in the background. So Jackie Altman. So there you had that during the war years. Thanks, Bobby. I think we're finished with that. Your family in America, the ones who left, your aunts and uncles, including your first cousin Vera, they were already in the United States. You were able to leave England right after the war. Is that right?
Yes. We corresponded all the time, and they used to send me care packages, I remember. But yes, I got a letter from them that they had a visa for me, and I could come to America as soon as I can get passage on a ship. And that was in January, so I quit school immediately, thinking I'm going in a week or so. Well, I didn't go for many months. And I taught the kindergarten class in the local school. And the local school was run by Church of England, but that had nothing to do with it. I had the primary.
Okay, so let me just get some focus on the time frame here. So we're talking about 1946, and you're starting to get ready to go to England. I did see a question pop up, and it's one that I forgot to ask you. During the war, Mom, did you have occasion to stay in touch with your own parents? And how did that go?
Yes, at the beginning, my mother wrote to me every day, and my father sent me magazines that I like to read. And this fortunately continued for a while, but then England was at war with Germany, and then they could send me mail through the Red Cross. And then one day I got a letter or a postcard, which the Nazis made them write, that we're going to the East. And that was the last. Yeah.
And we've learned as a family, I believe, that your parents ended up being shot to death in Kovno in Lithuania. And it was after some march east from one place to another. They were sent there, and that's where their lives ended. And I think that was in 1944, maybe that late. I'm not quite sure, but we just know that they
42.
42. Thank you for correcting me on all of this. So on the happier side of this, you were able to leave England as soon as the war ended and came to America to be with your relatives. So when you came to America, did you go to school or what happened?
Okay.
Yeah.
So as Miss Richmond, had saved me, I kind of felt so obligated. I mean, I wanted to. So I wanted to be a nurse also. And in order to be a nurse at the Beth Israel Hospital, you needed chemistry on your record. Well, I didn't have chemistry on my record because I failed it. So in Boston, there was no summer school. I had to go to high school for 1 year. And some teachers took an interest in me because I was a good student. I'd had wonderful education in England. And they said, you don't want to be a nurse. And they helped me to go to a good college, which I did.
Which college? Where did you go?
I went to Radcliffe, which nowadays is called Harvard. I mean, the girls go to Harvard.
Right.
And then my family, they were refugees. They had to make a living. They said, it's a beautiful school, beautiful degree. What are you going to do when you graduate?
That's what you said to me.
Look what you became, a good lawyer. Anyhow, a Philadelphia lawyer.
Oh boy.
Whatever that is. I really don't know. I shouldn't use that expression. Okay, stay to the point. What's the point? The teachers took interest in me. Oh yeah, so I went to Radcliffe. And what am I going to do when I graduate? So I took a vocational test and it said, I'm a people person as compared to a numbers person. And I said, hey, I always liked books and filing and all that. And I became a librarian.
So you went to Simmons College to finish up your.
I graduated from Simmons.
Okay, so before we go too much further, and we're almost at the end until you started to make babies in America, which we won't go into too much. But Bobby, if you
I did get married.
I know, we'll get there.
You said make babies.
Well, yeah, good. They were legitimate. Could you turn to the item 7, Bobby?
Whoops.
Oh yeah, that's something we didn't see, but that's not the one. And it's not that. There was a photograph.
That's my citizenship.
Oh,
Okay. And there was a picture I just wanted. I thought it was delightful that we should share. Okay, that's you on your graduation from high school on June 4th, 1947.
Yes.
That's from there is when you went to from there is when you went to college. And
Yes.
thank you, Bobby. We could take that down and you could keep the other document up, because from college you went to New York City and went to Columbia Graduate School for Library Science. Is that right?
Yes.
And around that time, when you're maybe at or around the time, there's a question from the audience. We'll get to that later. You got your U.S. citizenship, it looks like, on February 11, 1952.
Yeah, because America has states' rights. Because I was no longer living in Massachusetts, I had to stay an extra 6 months in New York State beyond the usual 5 years. I thought that's interesting.
So, all right. So, but you were already living in New York and graduate school, and
Yeah.
So let's just be clear. Your family that you came to be with in America were all in Boston area, more or less. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And then there was Aunt Lotta, who helped get you out of Berlin, and on the kindertransport, she and her husband Hans, and their son Walter came to New York ultimately, and you spent much time with them there. Is that right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And then we'll just very succinctly fast forward and say then you met Samuel H. Zilka, or Zilka at the time, his name, and married and had 3 children. Is that right?
Correct.
Well,
Correct.
think that rest of that story is for another day, but I think this is the story of Ellen Zilka through the war years. And I'm pleased to say that from my experience and perspective, you're one of the lucky kids from the kindertransport to say that you had generally a good experience.
Yes. I'll just say you're right. Some children were used as nannies and that kind of thing. Some children arrived and were put into a youth hostel and never really left the youth hostel. And some were older, and one woman became a nurse. She said that was the best part of her life. And I just will finish the story with my brother's unfortunate life. As he was only 5 years old when he left, he was so traumatized. He never got over it. He never adjusted to life. Things didn't go right. He had mental problems all his life. And at the early age of 73, he took his life. And we say he was a victim of Hitler.
Of Hitler, that's right.
But I'm fortunate I had a good life.
Indeed. And
she's proof. 1/3 of the proof.
I think we're ready to go off of the spotlighting function, Bobby, and see if there's any questions and answers we could do for about 10 minutes we have in person. I know I've looked through the chat, but I think we've answered most of them. So if anyone wants to speak, if you want to unmute and just ask a question, we'll see if we can, Ellen can answer.
Or you can raise your hand using the reaction button or your physical hand, but we are watching two screens of Zoom boxes. So.
And it's Fran. Fran.
Yeah, it sounded like that you lived through Kristallnacht. And what do you remember from that evening?
Well, I explained the synagogue that was so near our home was not burnt at the time. All I remember is my father coming back, as I said, for his talis and tefillin. That's all I remember from Kristallnacht.
Karen Zeitz, you want to try?
Yes, thank you so much, Ellen and Diane. It's just so, I don't even know what the word is to say, but thank you for sharing the story about your amazing
Well, you're
life.
welcome. The reason I was so pleased to do it is because I'm not plugging the kindertransport, but not many people know about it.
Right.
And you know, it was a wonderful thing.
I just, my question was on the two first documents that Diane showed was like a red J or an orange J. Is this for Jewish?
Yeah, for Juden. Yeah.
Juden. Yeah, that's what I thought.
It was a Jewish identification card we had to have.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, we had to register. So when they came for roundups, I guess they knew exactly where everybody was living.
If I can move on to Susan Thompson, has her hand up.
First, I'd like to thank Ellen for sharing your story and Diane for orchestrating it. It was very moving. My mother came a little bit earlier. She also came from Germany. She came in 36, but she had to come by herself. She came on an ocean liner. And she was very traumatized, even though she was probably about 14, you know, coming by herself without her family to live with a relative. And although, thank God, she never committed suicide and so on, she was always very depressed. So I think that, you know, it's easy to understand for me how your brother might have felt being torn, you know, from his parents at such a young age. But I do appreciate you sharing what you remember, because my mother was not able to really talk about a lot of it. She did talk about her schooling in Germany, and she was very proud of that. But I think some of the rest of it was so painful that even though she wasn't in the concentration camp, she exhibited some of the behaviors of concentration camp victims when they can't talk about things. So thank you for highlighting some of the experiences you had.
Well, you're welcome. I'm a talker.
Ellen, we do have one or two questions. I think, Bobby, we have time for that.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat that Sue Frank posted.
Yeah, I'm going to post.
Okay.
I want to tie it in with something else. Ellen, Sue Frank from our congregation asks if you stayed in touch with Miss Richmond. Is that's the right way to put it? And in fact, I think there was also a woman who was a cook who happened to have the name Mrs. Cook. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
my girlfriends I kept in touch with. There is a letter that Miss Richmond sent to my aunt and uncle who, took me in later on. What should she do with me, career-wise? Once I'm finished with school, because I stayed in high school to the very last year. But by my family inviting me to America, making it possible to come, she didn't have that responsibility because I was no longer in England, but she was concerned what would be my future. Yes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And then you recently showed me correspondence that you had with many of your girlfriends while you were here, and that you guys kept up quite a bit for a good while. And then I went with you when I was a young teenager in 1975 to England, and we visited your friends, and we visited the house where you grew up in the Cotswolds, and we visited Miss Cook. I believe she was still alive, and that was quite incredible. But let's just bring this fast forward, because this January 2023, my mom and I went to the German consulate in New York as guests of the consulate for the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is celebrated in Europe as on the day, I think, that Auschwitz was freed. And there were many people there. I think he might have had easily 60 people. He had lovely, a little chamber group from Juilliard performed in their beautiful home. And then we had like Viennese tea, coffee, and cakes. And it was a lovely thing. And Mom, what happened that day? Who did you meet?
Yeah, well, as she said, we were invited to coffee and cake and real whipped cream, and we could sit anywhere. So we sat, and by coincidence, I sat myself down next to a lady who was in England in the same high school at the same time that I was there. And we didn't know each other at the time. And so we exchanged addresses, and I've called her twice. She lives in Long Island, in Great Neck. And it was very nice and very, very much by chance that we were at the same school at the same time. And as I say, the refugee committee got us together for the high holidays.
I don't know.
Oh, I must tell you one funny thing.
Please.
Maybe it's a good thing to end on. So the lady, Miss Richmond, was very well aware of the rules of kashrut, and the English love their bacon and eggs. And she wanted to find a substitute for me. So for 7 years with my eggs, I had Spam, and nobody knew what Spam is. Before the computer, you know what it is, chopped ham. I think that's a good way to end.
I agree.
We did have Enid had her hand up, and there was one other question in the chat from Debbie.
Yeah, I thought the chat question, I told Debbie maybe we can talk about that another time, but
Okay.
but that one is, Mom, the short question really is, honestly, to me, you've been a very happy person. The question rightfully was posed, did you experience yourself depression or any kind of thing that you can identify was a result of the Holocaust, that you ever were in touch with yourself?
I think the word is sublimate. I don't dwell on it. I don't dwell. I was too busy living life, and I've been very fortunate. I had a very good marriage, and it's worked out for me. Unfortunately, it didn't for my brother. Yeah, they claimed that they adopted him when my aunt and uncle wanted to bring him over, and they said no, they wouldn't let him go. They adopted him. He found out they did not legally adopt him. I mean, things just didn't go right for him.
Enid,
Yeah.
we'll finish with you, okay?
Okay, 2 questions. First of all, thank you so much. And I must tell you, Ellen, I admire your tenacity and your resilience, and the fact that you continued and went on with a great deal of education. I wonder if you know who was responsible for leading and putting together your kindertransport. Usually there's some person associated with that.
I think my mother's cousin Lotta Friedman, who was already living in England prior to coming to America. I think when my parents realized the family would never get out, and they somehow heard about the kindertransport, they got in touch with my mother's cousin Lotta, and I think I always thanked her for it. Yes, I think she did the necessary work to get both my brother and me on it.
And when you went to England, were you able to spend time with your brother?
Yes, every Pesach. Every
that's
Pesach, I went to the family that he lived with, and we had a Seder. Oh, we used to invite American soldiers, and I was a teenager. That was very exciting. Yes.
Did he?
we had always-
But he also came. He also came to the United States.
my brother, no, they
Oh,
wouldn't let him go.
It
That
wouldn't-
was another one of his disappointments.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
I wish, so that's end on, I don't know if there is anything happier than to say, Mom, you're here to tell the tale. And that's the happiest part of all of this for all of
Well,
us.
thank you.
I
Thank
know
you.
we're all grateful for hearing your story. And
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm glad I could share it with you. And
I will say that this
and-
was planned
good
3
life
years.
to all of you. And I really do love your congregation. I tell you, I told my synagogue in Queens that I'm doing it tonight. They're doing something also. And he said, go for it. And they're going to publicize it on your recorder, because I'm a member of that congregation too.
But for
And by the way, that rabbi, Diane has heard it 100 times. He grew up and had congregations in Philadelphia and loves the city and talks about it a lot. And one of the congregations was a Reconstructionist.
So I also want to just thank everyone and just say this was supposed to happen 3 years ago, but I guess it's a good thing in some ways, because COVID then introduced us to Zoom, which got, I think, more people together to be able to hear this and to record it, and we could share it with others. So with that, I think we'll say thank you to Bobby for hosting us.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you.
everyone,
Yes.
have a good night, everybody.
And
Thank you.
Thank
Diane
you all
and
for
Ellen,
coming.
Ellen,
I'm
thank you
for
so
coming.
much. We love you and we value you as a member. And
Thank
Diane, what can I say? You're the best.
Yes,
Thank
she
you.
is.
Thank you both
Yes,
very,
she is. Well,
very much.
thank you
And
all
thank
for
you all
coming.
attending.
All right, bye,
Thank
everybody.
you so much.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. Yeah.
His brother committed suicide